South East Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
With concerns growing about Ireland's ability to meet its obligations under the 2009 Renewable Energy Directive by 2020, it's widely anticipated that the government will introduce a solar tariff by the end of this year to incentivise energy generation through solar technologies. Joining me now to discuss solar farms and the logistics of such developments is Peter Duff, the CEO of Power Capital. Peter, Power Capital was in the news recently, having secured 20 sites for solar farm projects. But for those of our listeners that may not be familiar with the company, tell us about the history of Power Capital.
Power Capital came into being in 2011. Justin Brown is my business partner. We both met and were both similarly enthused by solar. We came from a financial background, both of us, and we were attracted to solar because of its annuity-style income, I suppose, which was available from people who wanted to invest in solar. Our first project took about a year to get underway, which was a rooftop in Germany of 1 megawatt size, feeding back into the grid. So what we did was we put investors into special purpose vehicles. We raised the debt, brought the equity in, and we purchased the project. People at that stage, if you might recall, 2011 was a tricky time in Ireland. We were looking for non-Irish assets. People wanted to diversify. Germany was obviously the logical place, and infrastructure was a good place to put your money and get an annuity income or yield, which was not available in Ireland at the time.
Now, over the past few years, you've been busy going out, dealing with farm owners with a view to getting options on their sites so that you could get planning permission to put solar farms in place. Was there much work involved in that?
There's considerable amount of work involved in that, actually. Yeah, I mean, I think from the start, what we do is we obviously the first thing we screen for is the solar resource. Wexford has a better solar resource than Donegal. We then have to screen for the grid because the grid is finite. We have to make sure there's capacity available if we do go to the landowner and lease his land. We then have to go to the farmer, knock on his door, introduce ourselves, make him feel comfortable with the sort of company that we are, and then we have to bring through that heads of terms, and if that's acceptable to the farmer, we bring that through to legals and put the option on the lease in place. So yes, there's quite a bit of work. You have to put a lot of effort in to get the output at the far end.
How receptive were the farmers to this?
At the beginning, there was a bit of scratching heads, I suppose, really, because the first thing we encountered was solar in Ireland, really, and you have to go through that process. As we were active in Germany for since 2011, ourselves and a few others were very early into this process because we saw the opportunity. But again, I think it's quite interesting to see the change now. If you mention solar now, there's much more of an understanding about it. And people have kind of crossed over the hurdle of does it work in Ireland? Well, yes, it does, and people kind of get that now. So for us, the first couple of conversations were difficult, because people had to get used to the idea that there could be a solar farm in Ireland that would work. So working our way through that, over the last 18 months, 2 years, as I say, the knowledge levels have increased considerably, and it's a much easier conversation now.
Let's get back then to the grid, so you can look at a solar map. Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland have it on their website, so you can see at a glance whether that particular site and that location makes sense or not. But there's a little bit more work involved in looking to see if the grid has capacity for you to connect a solar farm to it. What's involved in that process?
Well, luckily, we employ a grid specialist, a low and high voltage expert who's been very instrumental in picking our grid spots. We understand that his understanding is that not all the substations are useful or have the capacity to take this on. So he has to go around literally individually to the substations, check them out, work with the relevant district network operators to come to some sort of conclusion as to whether that capacity is there or not. So that's what we did. We employ our experts wisely and guys that have experience.
And then the next stage in the process really is to get planning permission. How are the local authorities looking at this? Because we've seen countrywide there seems to be serious problems in getting wind farms approved. Is there any issue in relation to solar farms, or are the local authorities welcoming those?
Our initial contact with the local authorities was down in Wexford, and I must say we had a great. Our first meeting we were very pleased with the way it went. I think you have to realise the visual impact for solar is completely different to that of wind. The solar panel is 1 metre off the ground at the front and 2.5 metres off the ground at the back. If it's screened adequately, you won't even see the solar farm at all. So for us, we understand that the government is under a lot of pressure to reduce its carbon footprint, and we understand that Ireland is staring down the barrel of some serious fines in terms of its 2020 targets. So I presume this message is getting through to local authorities as well, that we must work to accommodate solar in that regard. Visual impact seems to be the one thing that they major on, and they want to make sure that that you don't impact the area or that. But the environmental impact of these is extremely low, and therefore we think it's got a natural advantage over other renewable technology. So for us, the general understanding from the councils tends to vary from council to council, but some of them we know have gone and checked out plants overseas, in particularly the UK, to see how the planners over there dealt with that. So their knowledge is increasing as the months go by as well, because I know that there's 2.9 gigawatts of application going in the grid. So you can imagine they're going to get hit with a number of planning applications in the next year. So they're upskilling themselves on what to look for. But in the main, I would say the authorities, the local planners, have been very understanding of and sympathetic towards solar.
Now, one of the other steps in the process is the application for grid connection. What does that involve, and how long does it take?
Yeah, well, the application for grid connection is a long process for us, and probably a bit too long to be truthful. You put in an NC5 application into the grid, and that gets you in the queue. This will be done sequentially, node by node. So it refers back to a central node, ultimately as a differentiator as when you get your grid offer. So this can take anything from 3 months to considerably longer, 3 years. So it's probably a bottleneck in the system. It's going very, very slowly, and I think we're outside the gate process. So I know that the district network operator is looking at this and seeing how they could streamline it better, but it is a slow process. In order, you have to put in your application, you have to put in detailed drawings on how you're going to map out your farm and schematics, etc. So all that goes into the application at the start, and each application, depending on the size of the farm, typical 5 megawatt farm was costing $7,500 to put the application in. So that's the process. It's slow. It needs to be looked at, I think, for everybody to make it easier, both from the DNO, the district network operator's point of view, and from the developers.
Now, as you mentioned earlier, 2.9 gigawatts of applications have gone in already. There's a concern out there about grid squatting. Tell us a little bit about that and where that concern is coming from.
Yeah, I think the problem is don't like using the word gold rush, but a lot of people do think there's some sort of gold rush on here, and that it's easy to lock out some grid capacity for a relatively, and I use the word guardedly, relatively small fee, and then you can hopefully get your grid offer. And then you can flip on your grid offer at a later date for presumably a significant uptake. So I think what we, as I say, I'm a member of the Irish Solar Energy Association, and we're in talks with the department to suggest that there should be a differentiating factor in order to get to the top of the queue, and that differentiating factor should be that you should get planning permission, and if you have planning permission, then you go to the top of the queue that we talked about earlier. So for us, that means that only really serious operators are going to want to spend the further money, if you will, to get the grid application right. And we think that of that 2.9 gigawatts, a significant proportion will not see the light of day due to planning issues, and indeed due to grid issues. But at the same time, the authorities have to deal with those in a sequential manner, which clutters up and clogs up the system. So if you get people in there trying to game the system for a relatively modest amount up front, well, then that can slow things things down. So we feel that the differentiating factor should be planning permission, and that gets people into the top of the queue. To do that, you need to spend money, and it's less likely that people who are going in just to game the system will have that money to do that. So our view is that's the best way to do it.
I know that the Irish Solar Energy Association have been lobbying for some type of a tariff or an economic-driven mechanism to be brought in for solar, and it's quite likely that that will be brought in by Q4 of this year. What do you expect that to look like?
I think there's two legs to that particular answer. One is the ground-mounted tariff support mechanism is more likely to be economic driven. I think it goes back to how Brussels view it ultimately, and Brussels don't like the word tariff, and there's a move generally across the European Union away from tariffs. So what they like to see is some sort of economics driven mechanism coming in. Yes, they're happy to support, but at the same time, they want inputs to be real, and I think from a ground-mounted point of view, we expect to see a contract for difference type mechanism coming into play. So ultimately, that's good for the consumers, good news for consumers. It means that inputs from the developer have to be very competitive, because we're in an auction process. We're going to supply energy to the grid at a certain price. So we'd better get our ducks and drakes lined up in a row and make sure the inputs, such as the cost of our funds and the cost of building out the plant, are accurate and good. The second part of the equation would be for rooftop, which is slightly different. We think that's probably more like a feed-in tariff system, which they have in say, mainland Europe. The feed-in tariff is a direct support, which will be more of a tariff nature. So we expect to see some news on this, hopefully Q4 of this year, and possibly Q1 next year. But I think the sooner the better, because the targets of 2020 are looming.
Now, lots of farmers right across County Wexford and beyond have been approached by developers around the whole topic of solar farms over the past 2 or 3 years, with some being offered anything from €500 to rent their land per acre up to €5,000 per acre per annum. What advice would you give farmers listening to this morning's show that have been approached but have yet to make a decision?
If you're going with somebody, a developer, make sure that your plant, that plant will get built, because if it doesn't get built, they're not going to execute the option on your lease, and you don't get the benefit of that clearly. So anybody, if it looks too good to be true, invariably it is too good to be true. So I would say, first of all, trust your instincts on this. If in terms of getting in with the right developer, get to understand the bona fides of that developer, and ask probing questions about the developer. That's the first step, I would say. Secondly, I think that we'd be. If I was the farmer, obviously getting good legal advice around anything that you do is important. I think agree your commercial terms with the developer, but then go to your lawyer and get good legal advice around that. A lot of these now are pretty plain vanilla, these option agreements, and a lot of, I know, having dealt personally with some of the law firms down in Wexford, there's a lot of familiarity around them, and so I think going into your solicitor, ironing out what making sure that the commercial terms that you've agreed are correctly reflected in the actual option agreement, I think is important. So I would say that that's the two things I would advise farmers in that regard. 2
reasons why developers would go and offer a farmer far and above what they could expect for their land over the course of a year.
Yes.
The first one is the opportunity to flip that option on the land to another developer down the road.
Yes.
The second one then in relation to it is for them to get the farmer to buy in early and then to go back when the tariff comes in and to renegotiate the lease terms based on the fact that they said the tariff isn't as high as what we thought it would be.
Look, I think you're absolutely right. And I think we as a company, Power Capital, we could have signed up a lot more than we did sign up if we were prepared to play that game. And what we've majored on is, going back to the point I made about if you're dealing with a developer, make sure that your plant gets built. If this is an economic-driven subsidy, i.e. the inputs that the developer has to put in will include a key economic input, clearly, is the cost that he's going to pay for his land per acre. If that's too high, well, then he's not going to be economic in the auction. So therefore, he won't win the auction. So it goes back to that. If it's too good to be true, then it probably is too good to be true. So I think that's number one. And number two, we do get asked, we've been asked the question, are you going to flip the option? And our answer is emphatically no. We're in it for the long haul. We've got, we're asset managing plants in Germany since 2011, and we're not going to do that. We're in to build these plants out, but clearly there will be others that will quite happily flip the option and move it on. But for us, we don't. We want to go to full build out on this. So the renegotiation bit. Look, there's a risk here because we don't know what that economic tariff subsidy is going to be. If it comes in at a certain level, well, then there's no need to renegotiate. And if it comes in at a low level, well, then others who got their inputs wrong are going to come back to the farmer and say, guess what? We need to talk this through again. So that's a possibility and an option, and the farmer should be aware that could happen. So it goes back to, if they do think they're getting too high a number, or this conversation, they might want to get ready for that conversation.
Now, just looking at solar farms themselves and the benefits to but apart from the short-term construction jobs that are there and the building out of this solar farm, where are the other economic benefits for the community?
Okay. Well, look, the economic benefits for the community are coming in from I suppose at the holistic level. You're going to get 2.5 billion of gross added value into Ireland Inc. Between the years of say 2017 and 2030. That's as the KPMG report has said. There are 7,300 jobs from that same report in the mix as well. Some of them in construction, some of them in operations and maintenance. But the other, dividend, if you like, is for the community, the people, the farmers themselves who are going to benefit from this. Think of the diversification of their income. That maybe if on a 100-acre farm, they've got 25 acres with the solar developer. They're getting a premium for that, and I think that that's a nice way to start the year, knowing that you've got incremental payments over the course of the year, guaranteed. And it's not. I know that farmers' incomes can be very volatile, but at least you're taking that volatility out of the mix, and you're putting that money into a solar farm. Means that money is going to be spent in the supermarkets and schools, etc. All that money has to get put back into the system ultimately somewhere. So from that point of view, you have a multiplier effect.
Now, Peter, government solar incentives have been on the agenda for the past 5 years, and they seem to be kicked down the road over that period. I know you're quite confident that these incentives will come by Q4 of this year, but what happens if they're moved further down the road by another year or two? How is that going to impact Power Capital's business plan?
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be good news, clearly, if that did happen. Now, we have length of time in our option, which is probably in our favour. So, we can. It doesn't mean that you have to sort of close the shop down. It means that it's going to take us longer to get into a revenue stream. So for us, it wouldn't be ideal. We have a sort of a portfolio approach to our business here anyway. We have assets which we manage out in Germany, and we're looking at other jurisdictions, but clearly we've made a sizable investment into Ireland. So for us, any delay wouldn't be good news, but dare I say, it wouldn't be good news for anybody. Do we really want to run this one up to the wire up to 2020 before we solve the problem? The fines just start in 2020, but they're incremental, and every year it's going to get higher. I know I'm pretty sure that the Department of Finance of late in particular has switched onto this and are now getting very, very concerned. So, them plus the likes of multinationals who want to locate here and want to increase their footprint here, and multinationals typically don't want to buy fossil fuel energy. They want to buy green, renewable energy. If we start to delay our rollout, well, there's a chance that these multinationals who are at the cusp of decisions to locate in Ireland will not now locate here.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.